The doorbell rang at 6:47 inches the morning, and I already knew it wasn't going to be good news. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee, watching the frost still clinging to the edges of the backyard grass, the way it always does in November in Ohio. At 63 years old, I've learned to read mornings. Some mornings carry weight before anything has even happened. This was one of those mornings. I set my mug down and walked to the front door. My son-in-law was standing on the porch in his workout clothes, arms crossed, jaw set the way he always sets it when he's about to say something he's rehearsed. Behind him, my daughter's car was idling in the driveway. She didn't get out. "We need to talk," Derek said. I stepped aside and let him in. His name was Derek Callahan, 38 years old, sales director at a medical device company, made good money, knew it, and made sure everyone else knew it too. He had the kind of confidence that came not from accomplishment but from the assumption that he deserved everything he had. My daughter Claire had married him 4 years ago, and I had smiled through the whole wedding because I loved her and because I believed, at the time, that I might be wrong about him. I was not wrong about him. He sat down at my kitchen table without being invited to, and looked around the room the way he always did, slowly, appraisingly, like he was calculating what everything was worth. I had lived in this house for 31 years. My wife Margaret had picked out every piece of furniture, every curtain, every small decoration on the walls. She passed away 2 years ago. The house still felt like her, and I needed it to feel like her, and Derek had never once understood that. "Dad," he said, and he always said it with a small pause before it, just a half-second delay that made clear he didn't mean it. "Claire and I have been talking, seriously talking, and we think it's time you considered your options." I sat down across from him. "My options. The house is too big for one person. You're 63. The upkeep alone." He opened his hands in a gesture that was meant to look generous. "We've been looking at some really nice assisted living communities. There's one in Westerville, actually very upscale, and we think—" "I'm 63, I said. "Not 83. He smiled the way people smile when they think they're being patient with someone who doesn't understand. "Dad, it's not about age. It's about being realistic. This house is worth," he caught himself, but not before I'd already heard the direction the sentence was going. "The point is, there are better options for everyone. For everyone." I let that sit in the air between us for a moment. "Does Claire want to come in?" I asked. "She's tired. The pregnancy is exhausting her." Claire was 7 months pregnant with their first child, my first grandchild. I had spent the last 4 months refinishing the spare bedroom upstairs, painting it a soft sage green because Claire had mentioned once, years ago, that sage green was calming. I had put in new flooring. I had built a small window seat with storage underneath because I remembered how much Margaret had always wanted one in her reading room, and I thought maybe a grandchild would love to sit there someday with a book. Derek didn't know about any of that. He hadn't asked. "Tell her I said good morning," I said. He left 20 minutes later, after giving me brochures, actual brochures, printed and folded, for 3 different senior living facilities, and telling me they just wanted what was best for me, and that I should really think about it seriously this time. He said this time, as if we'd had this conversation before, which we hadn't, which meant he'd already decided it would be ongoing until he got what he wanted. I walked back to the kitchen window after I heard his car back out of the driveway. I watched the frost on the grass, still there, slower to melt than I'd expected. I had spent 34 years as a forensic accountant, the last 18 of them as a senior investigator for the federal government. I had worked financial fraud cases, insurance schemes, estate manipulation. I had seen, more times than I could count, the specific pattern that begins when someone decides that an asset belongs to them before it legally does. The preparation, the pressure, the slow erosion of the target's sense of reality and independence. I recognized the pattern. I poured the rest of my coffee down the drain, rinsed the mug, and set it in the dish rack. Then I called my attorney. His name was Franklin Osei, and we had been friends for 22 years, since the early days when I was still with the government, and he was a junior partner at a firm downtown. He was meticulous, thorough, and completely without sentimentality when it came to legal matters, which was exactly what I needed. "Is this a general inquiry?" Franklin said, when I'd explained the situation, "or do you want to start building a record?" "I want to build a record," I said. "Then document everything from today forward. Dates, times, what was said, who was present. Don't change anything in your behavior yet. Just watch and record." I already knew this. I had told witnesses the same thing for 30 years. But it helped to hear it from Franklin, to make it official in my own mind. This was no longer just a family discomfort. This was something I needed to treat with the same discipline I had brought to every case I had ever worked. So I watched. Over the next 6 weeks, I watched very carefully. Claire called twice a week, and I noticed the calls had a quality to them that her calls had never had before, a certain scripted feel. Questions arriving in sequences that didn't follow naturally from what I'd just said. Long pauses that felt like consultation. She asked 3 times, in 3 different conversations, whether I'd looked at the Westerville brochure. She asked once whether I'd spoken to my financial advisor lately. And when I said yes, she asked what we had discussed. I told her we'd talked about rebalancing my portfolio, which was true, and I watched the conversation move quickly on to something else. Derek came by on a Sunday afternoon in early December, uninvited, while I was raking the backyard. He walked around the property in a slow circuit, hands in his jacket pockets, pausing at the detached garage, looking up at the roofline, crouching once near the foundation along the east wall. He told me he was just checking in. He stayed 40 minutes, drank the coffee I offered because refusing it would have been rude, and left without having said anything that could be called a real reason for the visit. I wrote it all down. Date, time, duration, behavior. The second Sunday in December, Claire came for dinner alone. She was large with the pregnancy now, moving carefully, and I cooked the chicken piccata that she had loved since she was 12 years old, and I set the table the way Margaret used to set it when we had company, with the good plates and the cloth napkins, and we sat together and talked for 2 hours about things that mattered: her childhood, Margaret, what Claire hoped for in motherhood, whether she thought the baby would have her eyes or mine. Somewhere near the end of the meal, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. "Dad," she said. And when she said it, there was no pause before it. It was just the word, just my name in her voice, the way it had always been. "Derek thinks you should really consider moving. And I think he might be right that the house is a lot to manage, but I don't know. It feels wrong to push. Do you want me to move?" I asked her. She was quiet for a long time. "I want you to be okay." "I am okay. Are you?" She looked at me the way she had looked at me the day of her mother's funeral, like she was searching for something to hold on to. "You're alone in this house, and you work on projects by yourself. And I worry." "I know you do." I squeezed her hand. "I've been managing things for a long time, sweetheart. I know the difference between being alone and being lonely." She nodded. She wasn't completely convinced, but she nodded. What she didn't know, what I hadn't told her yet, because I didn't want her stress levels elevated in the final weeks of her pregnancy, was that 2 days earlier, Franklin had called me with something interesting. Derek had contacted a real estate attorney, not a buyer's agent, not a general real estate consultant, a specific kind of attorney who handles estate property transfers. The attorney, through professional channels Franklin wouldn't explain in detail, but which I trusted implicitly, had made quiet inquiries about whether a property held in a single owner's name could be transferred to a family trust without requiring the owner's ongoing active management. The specific phrasing that had come back to Franklin was cognitive incapacity provisions. I sat with that for a moment when Franklin told me. Cognitive incapacity provisions. Derek wasn't just planning to pressure me into selling the house. He was building a legal pathway to take it from me by establishing, at some future point, that I wasn't mentally capable of managing my own affairs. I had worked cases like this for the government. I had helped send people to federal prison for cases like this. And I want to tell you honestly, because I think it matters. When it's your own family, when it's the man your daughter chose, and the father of your coming grandchild, there is a moment, just one moment, when everything in you wants to be wrong, wants to have misread it, wants to discover that there's an innocent explanation. I sat in my armchair that evening, and I gave myself that moment. Then I called Franklin back and told him to proceed. Proceed with what specifically? He said. Everything, I said. What Franklin did over the following 3 weeks, I can only describe in general terms, because some of it remains part of ongoing legal proceedings. But the core of it was this. He assembled a comprehensive legal review of my assets, my estate documents, my full financial and medical history, and my professional record, and he did it in partnership with a colleague of mine from my government years, a woman named Donna Rice, who now ran a financial investigations consultancy, and who owed me a favor that dated back to a fraud case in 2009 that I will not describe further here. Donna found things. Derek's company, not his employer, his personal company, a side LLC he had registered in Delaware 18 months earlier, had received 2 transfers from an account held in Claire's name. The account was a joint savings account that they had opened when they married. The amounts were not enormous, but the timing was specific, and the nature of the Delaware LLC's stated business activity did not correspond to any actual business activity Donna's team could identify. More relevantly, Derek had a previous marriage. Brief, before Claire, ended in divorce. His first wife had filed a civil complaint that was later withdrawn. The complaint alleged financial misconduct related to marital assets. It had been withdrawn because she had accepted a settlement whose terms included a non-disclosure clause. When I read Donna's preliminary summary, I recognized the architecture immediately. Not the specific facts, but the architecture. The shape of what someone builds when they have done this before and believe they can do it again. I asked Franklin how long it would take to complete a full filing. To do it right, he said. 6 weeks. Can you do it in 4? I can do it in 4 if you stop asking me questions and let me work. I'll stop asking questions, I said. The baby came on the 14th of January, a Tuesday, just after noon. Claire called me from the hospital, and her voice was different from any voice I had ever heard from her. Cracked open, wrecked and radiant at the same time, and she said, "Dad, she's here. She's so small. Dad, can you come?" And I drove to the hospital with my hands shaking on the wheel. My granddaughter was 7 pounds, 2 ounces, and she had Claire's nose and eyes, the color of the deep winter sky. And when the nurse placed her in my arms in that recovery room, I held her, and I thought about Margaret, and I thought about the sage green room with the window seat, and I thought about everything I had spent the last 10 weeks, building in quiet and methodical preparation, and I made a decision that I had already, in truth, already made. She would not grow up watching her grandfather be diminished. I stayed at the hospital until visiting hours ended. Derek was there, performing the role of new father with the same calculated awareness he brought to every room he entered, smiling for the photos, saying the right things, shaking my hand when I arrived with a warmth that was precisely calibrated. I smiled back. I held my granddaughter. I told Claire she was extraordinary, because she was, because she had always been. On the drive home, Franklin called. "We're ready," he said. "Then let's go," I said. "I want to explain something about what happened next, because I think it matters for how you understand it." I did not call the authorities and point fingers. I did not go to Claire with accusations. I did not confront Derek. I had spent 34 years watching people make those mistakes, the accusation, before the evidence is complete, the confrontation that gives the target time to cover tracks, the emotional intervention that turns into a he said, she said that goes nowhere. What I did was file. Franklin submitted a comprehensive civil fraud complaint with supporting documentation on a Thursday morning. Donna's team simultaneously delivered a formal referral to the relevant federal financial oversight body. I will not specify which one related to the Delaware LLC and the transfers from Claire's account. There was also a third component, which was a formal legal notification served to the real estate attorney Derek had quietly contacted, informing that attorney that the property in question was the subject of active legal proceedings, and any further consultation related to estate transfer would be considered evidence of participation in potential fraud. I was at my kitchen table when all of this happened, drinking coffee, watching the January light move across the backyard. I wasn't there when Derek's phone started ringing. I wasn't there when his attorney called him. I wasn't there when the notification arrived at his office. I only heard about all of it later, from Claire, and I'll get to that. What I was there for was the birthday dinner. My brother Robert turned 67 that Saturday, and we had our usual family gathering at his house in Bexley. His kids, his grandkids, Claire and Derek, me. We do it every year. Margaret had started the tradition. I was not going to miss it. I arrived at 6. Claire was already there, seated on the couch with the baby in her arms, looking exhausted and luminous the way new mothers look. Derek was standing near the fireplace with a drink, and when I walked in, he turned to look at me, and something moved across his face, a flicker, quickly controlled, that I recognized. He knew. Not everything, not yet, but enough. His attorney had almost certainly been in touch. He knew something had been filed. He didn't know the scope of it, but he knew. He smiled. "Dad, good to see you." "Good to see you," I said. I went and sat beside Claire and held the baby, and the evening moved around us. Robert's grandchildren ran circles through the living room. Dinner was served. We sat at the long table, and I was placed at the far end near Robert, and Derek was at the other end, and I watched him across all those plates and glasses and candles and family, and I watched him try to decide what he knew and what he didn't know and what I knew and what I was going to do. He didn't eat much. After dinner, when the younger kids had been put down and the adults had moved back to the living room with coffee and pie, Derek appeared beside me near the windows. "Can we talk?" he said quietly. "Of course," I said. He walked us to the hallway, away from the room. His jaw was set again, but differently this time. The rehearsal was gone. Whatever he was about to say, he hadn't fully prepared. "I don't know what you've done," he said, "but I need you to understand that Claire has nothing to do with." "I know Claire has nothing to do with it," I said. He stopped. "The actions I've taken," I said, "are very specifically directed at specific activities and specific accounts and specific legal consultations. Claire is not implicated in any of them. Her attorneys, and she will need her own attorney. I'd recommend she get one soon. One that Derek did not choose will see that clearly when they review the documentation." He stared at me for a moment. "You're doing this to your own grandchild's father." "I'm doing this," I said, "to protect my daughter and my granddaughter from someone who has been systematically building a case to take my assets, control my daughter's finances, and potentially have me declared legally incapacitated. I'm doing it now, while the documentation is clean and complete, and before any of this goes further. And I want to be clear about something. Derek," I kept my voice very quiet. "In my experience, quiet is more effective than loud. I spent 34 years doing this professionally. I have more patience than you. I have more documentation than you. I have a better attorney than you. And I have something you have never had in your life." "What's that?" he said. "Nothing to hide," I said. I left him in the hallway and went back to the living room and spent the rest of the evening holding my granddaughter and talking with my brother and eating Robert's wife's extraordinary chocolate cake and watching the room with the particular kind of contentment that comes when you have done the right thing and done it carefully and done it in time. Derek left early. He told Claire he wasn't feeling well. The full picture took several more months to come clear, and I will compress it here because the legal details are less important than what they meant. Derek's Delaware LLC was found to have been used to conceal income from a commission skimming arrangement at his company, a separate matter entirely from anything related to me or Claire, but one that emerged as a byproduct of Donna's investigation. His employer became aware of this. He was terminated in February. The civil fraud complaint related to his actions toward my estate was settled through Franklin, with Derek agreeing to a formal legal instrument that I won't describe in full detail, but which effectively ended any legal claim he might ever make on my property or my assets, in exchange for my agreement not to pursue criminal referral on the estate-related activities. The marriage, I am sorry to say, did not survive. That is not something I celebrate. I want to be honest about that. Claire had loved him, in the way you love someone before you know who they are completely, and the unraveling of that took months and took a toll on her that I watched with a pain that was different from any professional pain I had ever felt. There are things you can build a record against. You cannot build a record against grief. What I could do was show up. So I showed up. I was at her house every week. I fixed things that needed fixing. I drove her to pediatric appointments when she was too tired. I sat with her on Tuesday evenings when the baby had finally gone down and the house was quiet and big and she needed someone to simply be in it with her. One evening in March, she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Dad, when did you know? About Derek, about what he was doing." A while before I filed anything, I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. Because you were pregnant, and I didn't want to put that weight on you before I had something solid. And because I paused, because I needed to be completely sure before I said a word that would change how you saw your marriage. That seemed like something I owed you. She was quiet again. The baby made a small sound from the other room and then settled. "I keep thinking," Claire said, "about all the times I repeated things to him that you said. During phone calls, he always wanted to know what we talked about." "I know," I said. "I didn't realize." "You weren't supposed to realize. That was the point." She looked at me then, and there was something in her expression that I hadn't seen there in years, not since she was a teenager, and I had helped her through something difficult, some crisis at school I no longer remember the specifics of. It was the look of someone who has been frightened and is now, slowly, not frightened anymore. "Were you scared?" she asked. I thought about the mornings I had spent running numbers and reviewing documents. I thought about sitting in my armchair giving myself that one moment to be wrong. "A little," I said. "Mostly I was angry. But I've learned that anger is useful when you keep it cold." She laughed, a real laugh, the first one I'd heard from her in weeks. And it sounded like her, and it sounded like Margaret, and it sounded like the house in the way the house sounds when it's full. In April, I finished the window seat in the spare room. I painted the trim a clean white that stood out nicely against the sage green. I sanded the seat boards smooth, added a cushion in a soft cream fabric, and installed small brass hinges on the storage lid, the kind Margaret had always liked. Claire brought my granddaughter over the first Saturday after I finished. I carried them both upstairs and showed them the room, and I set the baby on the window seat, and she looked out at the backyard with the serious, focused expression that 7-week-old babies have. Like the world is an enormous and complicated problem they are only beginning to assess. "Dad," Claire said, looking around the room, "when did you do all this?" "Over the winter," I said. "Kept me busy." She came and put her arm around me and leaned her head against my shoulder the way she had when she was small. And we stood there in the sage-green room in the April light, and I held my granddaughter and I did not say anything else, because there was nothing else that needed to be said. There is something I want to tell you before I finish, because I think it's the thing that actually matters. When you are 63 years old, and your wife is gone, and your daughter's marriage is failing, and someone is trying to take the house that still smells like everything you built your life in, it is very easy to let the fear run the whole operation. To move fast, to get loud, to make mistakes. I almost did, a few times. That morning after Derek left with the brochures, I stood at the kitchen window for a long time, and I was angrier than I had been in years. But Margaret used to say she said it about gardening. Actually, it was one of her gardening things she used to say that the plants that root the deepest are the ones that grow the slowest. She meant it about patience, about how the things worth having require a kind of stubborn, quiet insistence on doing the work right. I thought about that a lot over those months. I thought about it every time I sat down with Franklin, every time Donna's team sent another report, every time I wrote another date and time and observation in the notebook I kept in my desk drawer. I was not just protecting a house. I was protecting everything the house meant, and everything it would mean to my granddaughter when she was old enough to sit in that window seat and look out at the yard and read a book on a Saturday morning. Some things are worth the patience. I still drink my coffee at the kitchen table every morning, watching the backyard. The frost comes back every November, and every spring it leaves again. The house is exactly the size it needs to be. I am not going anywhere.